Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. Folks, this is one of the most savage, intense, fiery moments I've ever seen on CNN. And frankly, at least in my opinion, it really depends on your stance on this whole Russia-Ukraine situation. But this to me is one of CNN's most embarrassing moments. Almost as bad as the infamous 2016 moment between Sheriff David Clark and Don Lemon, where David Clark basically ended Don Lemon's entire career in one single moment. And there's a reason why Sheriff David Clark doesn't get invited on CNN anymore. Well, after this most recent interaction with Pink Floyd's Roger Waters, of all people, let's just say I don't think CNN's going to be bringing on Rogers anytime soon, and probably ever again, because he just shut down CNN's entire Russia-Ukraine narrative that they've been pushing for the last 6 months. He just shut the whole thing down in one little interaction in less than 2 minutes. One of the most epic, most savage defeats for CNN on air in a really long time. Let me show you guys what's going on here. So let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so I don't think we really need too much context behind just playing the clip. Here's Pink Floyd's Roger Waters on CNN discussing the Russia-Ukraine situation.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, the president, to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing.
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
That's you know, any war. When did it start? What you need to do is look at the history, and you can say, well, it started on this day. You could say it started in 2008. Okay, this war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people...
You have no role as liberators.
World War II? World War II? You
got into World War II because...
Come on.
Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. You were completely isolationist until that sad, that devastating,
I would argue we were always going to get in, and that
1941.
pushed us in. But thank God the United States got in, right? You lost your father in World War II. Thank God the United States.
Thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then. Don't forget, 23 million Russians died, protecting you and me from the Nazi menace.
And you would think the Russians would have learned their lesson from war and wouldn't have invaded Ukraine.
Well, you with all your reading, I would suggest to you, Michael, that you go away and read a bit more and then try and figure out what the United States would do if the Chinese were putting nuclear-armed missiles into Mexico and Canada.
The Chinese are too busy encircling Taiwan as we speak. Okay?
They're not encircling Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China, and that's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
Okay. An absolute savage, embarrassing defeat for the know-nothing warmongers at CNN. Maybe I'm a little bit more biased. Maybe this one's a little bit more personal for me, because Roger Waters is essentially saying what I've said since the start in my analysis of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. From my point of view, Roger Waters absolutely mopped the floor with this guy, and he kept saying it very clearly. You should probably read more. You should probably know what the hell you're talking about when discussing this very complex geopolitical issue. I was almost expecting this CNN hack to respond with something like this.
I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
He's speaking facts, and these fact-based talking points, or having a fact-based discussion, is what's been missing from the Russia-Ukraine narrative, or the popular public discussion that we've been experiencing over the last couple of months, because people have been blindly following the media narrative about this situation, instead of looking at the historical context, or looking at the nuance, or even looking from the Russian perspective, the Russian side. People get so caught up with Vladimir Putin bad, Russia bad, which is utterly idiotic if you ask me. Is Russia an autocratic state? Do they have a a bad track record when it comes to human rights? Are they a quasi-communist dictatorship? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that their foreign policy issues should be completely ignored or condemned, and that their national security issues don't exist. The one point that I mentioned all the time when we were covering the videos at the peak of this crisis was the expansion of NATO further and further towards the Russian border. That is a direct threat to the Russians, obviously. That is how they're going to perceive that. And there was in fact an agreement made that NATO would not be pushed further eastward. Though that agreement was never actually signed in paper, it was still a verbal agreement between both sides, and the entire goal was de-escalation. Well, the last couple of decades have been nothing but further escalation, pushing further and further towards Russia to the point where eventually they're going to react. I mean, it's almost as if Western globalist entities wanted this to happen in the first place. They were poking the bear, pun intended, and that's why it's not entirely surprising that Russia is acting the way that it's acting. Do I agree with Russia's actions? No, of course not. I think Russia should join the modern Western world. I don't think we should be at odds with them at all, but that's just not the situation. It's not the messy, irrational world that we live in. That's the problem with these Democrats. They view everything from the lens of propaganda and idealism instead of the complex reality. You're never going to get to the bottom of anything if all you do is condemn your opponent and view everything from a one-sided lens. You know, this concept applies to basic human interaction. You might have an individual who's wrong, who's acting out, who is hard to deal with, but condemning and demonizing and being condescending, using force or posturing in a threatening manner isn't going to make your interactions or your relationship with that individual ameliorate. It's going to make things worse. And that is exactly what we've been doing with Russia over the last couple of decades. And that's exactly why I preferred Donald Trump's approach. His approach was to befriend the Russians to a certain extent, to give them a little bit of validation and to come to the table and to discuss and to find middle ground, to find solutions. Where the current perspective of this administration, of course, the mainstream warmongering media, is essentially to tumble us into World War III. I mean, it's ridiculous. With their villainizing of Russia and all their sanctimonious crap, which of course all the lemmings and all the NPCs just follow blindly, putting the Ukraine flag in their bio and in their username, and essentially egging on and cheering on what seems to be an imminent war. It's ridiculous. I mean, why not meet in the middle? There is a border conflict happening in Russia. There's people living in Ukraine. There are certain cities in Ukraine on the border with Russia who identify as Russian nationals and want to be absorbed by the Russian state. Russia wants to take those states. Ukraine doesn't want to give them up. Instead of meeting at the table and finding a diplomatic solution to avoid further catastrophe, Western liberals would rather take a hardline stance and continue to escalate and enable further conflict and continue to fund it. Again, it's ridiculous. You can't get results without a little bit of sacrifice. Whether it's the right or wrong thing is completely irrelevant. How many lives are going to be saved if a compromise is found, if a decision is made? Take the damn land, Russia, sign a peace treaty, come to an agreement, and create some stability in the region, which will, of course, in turn create stability globally. No, of course not. Western liberals will never agree to this because Western liberals are having such an incredible time right now using this whole thing as an excuse to continue funneling billions upon billions of dollars in and through Ukraine. I mean, what's the number right now? Last I checked, it was 54 billion, but it's probably much more than that. I haven't exactly been following effectively. It's never ending, and it's of course nothing but the war racket and how incredibly frustrating it is. Rather than meeting at the table and finding a solution, sacrificing a little bit, which of course would be beneficial to the global economy with lower gas prices. I mean, moving out of this oil crisis, and of course Russian citizens who are currently suffering under sanctions and everything else. Instead of doing that, we're going to continue to enable it so these politicians can continue to funnel and launder billions of dollars through the Ukrainian cause. Meanwhile, Americans continue to suffer in the midst of this recession. You know, people want to start small businesses. They maybe want a small business loan. In many instances, these people seeking small business loans won't get funding, but the war machine that's trucking along in Eastern Europe, oh, that'll get instant funding, blank check funding to the tune of billions upon billions. You know, money that could actually serve inner city communities and underprivileged people and youth. Nah, let's continue to fund the war in Ukraine because my democracy or something. It's an absolute joke, folks. The whole thing's a racket, and I don't know what your opinion is. This is just my opinion, but Roger Waters is absolutely 100% correct in my mind. And he's also correct in this statement. Roger Waters tells CNN why Biden is a war criminal criminal and says host needs to read more. The guy actually called Biden a war criminal. Now that is based. I don't think a penny more should be spent in Ukraine. I think it's time to have serious talks and come to the table and find an agreement that puts this whole thing to rest. But of course, honestly, without Donald Trump, that's not going to happen.
This is what we heard from Joe Biden laying out his interpretation of events.
For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now it's unfolding largely as we predicted.
Now, it's important to note that Russia has repeatedly raised the issue of its security guarantees. In addition to that, Russia has made clear it has no intent to invade Ukraine. However, at this point, they are engaging in an operation to protect the people of Donetsk and Lugansk and make sure they do not continue to face the shelling and bombardment they have been enduring for the past 8 years. It's important to note that unlike what Joe Biden said, these republics were not declared by the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. They were declared by the peoples of these regions in response to the U.S. coup in 2014, and it has been 8 years since then that Russia has waited to declare the republics. Now, what was also interesting is when pressed by reporters, Joe Biden revealed some rather interesting lack of knowledge when it comes to events. One of the reporters actually asked him, is Putin threatening a nuclear strike? To which Biden replied, I don't know what he is threatening. So we have the President of the United States saying he doesn't know if nuclear war is on the table. Now, of course, Russia has not threatened a nuclear strike. Nuclear war is simply not on the table. Russia is engaging in an operation to protect Donetsk and Lugansk from attack. The idea that this is some kind of nuclear confrontation is pretty outrageous. But the fact that Biden responded to such a question with I don't know is something that a lot of Americans have got to find very concerning.
Well, European reaction has been pouring in since the start of the Russian so-called special operation in Ukraine. Paula Sleer delves deeper.
The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that Putin chose to bring war back to Europe. Now, this is factually incorrect. You need to remember, of course, that the war has been ongoing since 2014. So that's 8 years. And the Western media and Western diplomats are at fault for not pointing that out. In fact, in the last 4 years, so if we're looking at just simply from 2018 alone, there have been 381 civilians who have been killed in the Donbas region, and that is according to United Nations figures. This is 5 times more than the number of people who have been killed in territories that are controlled by Kiev. And the vast majority of these people who've been killed, in fact, over 80%, are in these 2 republics who have declared independence. This is what Ursula von der Leyen had to say.
Children are dying of fear for their lives. We condemn this barbaric attack and the cynical arguments to justify it. It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe.
Now, we have received a leaked text regarding this EU meeting that's currently underway, and it says that EU leaders will call for sanctions also to be imposed against Belarus for supporting Russia in this military action. Joseph Borrell, who is the High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs, made these comments.
President of the European Council, President Michel, has called for a meeting of the European Council this evening, and they will agree and provide political guidance to adopt the stronger package, the harshest package of sanctions we have ever implemented. This is not a question of blocks. This is not a question of diplomatic power games. It's a matter of life and death.
Earlier, the G7 met virtually, and they said that they were appalled by unprovoked and unjustified attacks by Russia. They said that this military action was preceded by fabricated claims and unfounded allegations. The G7 saying that this has fundamentally changed the Euro-Atlantic security situation, and that they too will bring forward severe and coordinated economic and financial sanctions.
Well, we can cross live now to Lionel, legal and media analyst. Thanks for joining us, sir. Good to have you with us today. Now, as we heard there from President Biden, just saying he's got no plans to talk with President Putin, do you think talking now might actually be a good idea?
I can't think of any reason why it would not be a good idea. In fact, we need a lot more. And what we really need, especially here, is a tutorial on the history of what this is all about. Because I am shocked at the number of people that I meet who are seemingly relatively intelligent, educated, who have not the slightest idea of what we're even talking about. But what they are getting from mainstream media, sock puppet media in particular, is that Putin is evil. And that the motivation for this is some kind of weird, kind of a psychotic evilness and to recreate the Soviet Union. And you know what? That's enough. Now, I have a theory. I don't know what you call it where you are, but in here we have these people called Karens. And they're able to become angry at the drop of a hat if you're not wearing a mask, if you're coughing, anything that goes wrong. Whether it's on an airplane, we are being conditioned to overreact to everything. And this, the Ukraine situation, is no exception. They have no idea. And what's also fascinating to me, and I must share this with you, is when I ask people, why is it that we or other countries can invade? Well, it's not invading, it was entering. Okay, well, is Putin entering? No, he's invading. Is it a partial invasion? Well, I don't know. Is he occupying? Well, it's a partial occupying. And there's all these little dissection of the words. And I'm a lawyer, and I love to parse words. But when it comes to Grenada, when it comes to the Falkland Islands, or Vietnam, or Iraq, or Afghanistan, we don't need justifying from anybody. We don't have to explain to anybody. Who matters? Who cares who's killed? We're right and they're wrong. But when it comes to this, people have it in their mind based upon this relentless, and by the way, let me remind you, 5 years plus of this Russophobic, anti-Russia rhetoric from collusion to elections, they jump into lockstep, almost out of a Pavlovian obeisance for reasons they have no idea. None. That's where we are right now.
In terms of the response as well, Biden said the US and its allies are taking steps to limit Russia's ability to do business in foreign currency, and other sanctions, of course, still to come, or very likely to come. How serious of a blow will that be for Russia and its economy?
Well, it depends. I think when somebody says sanctions, but a couple of things I noticed today. Did you notice when somebody brought up India? And he said, well, we'll get back with you on that one. Now, the last time I checked, when it came to BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, we have Russia, India, maybe China. This is a very important group here, and it was not an answer of I don't know. It was I'd rather not discuss that right now. So, are these sanctions? Are they serious? Well, they must be. They're called sanctions. But let me also add something which I must tell you. Here, we absolutely have this thing about white supremacy. Whenever anybody mentions white supremacy or Nazis, even though they're not, people will just stand in lockstep. Almost in a parade says, yes, we have to stop this because Trump is a racist and a Nazi. Everybody's a Nazi. Well, if you look at what we're talking about here, and I'm not saying they're Nazis, but this is as close to white supremacists as, the Azov battalions and others that are alleged. And you would think that this woke left contingent here would say, well, count me in. You never told me about that. Real right-wing extremists? Yes. It doesn't matter because, I'm sorry to say this, they couldn't find Ukraine, Donbass on a map, on a globe. This has nothing to do with the specifics here.
We are running out of time, Lionel. That's all we've got time for today, but thanks very much for your time. We do appreciate it, sir. Lionel, legal and media analyst.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, you know, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got. He's probably talking to his guys at this point, so I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.